Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidvaram Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savila Samaha Moha Graha Grasaika Karmani. Okay, so let us go ahead and read the verses that we covered last time. We'll read from verse number 12 up to verse number 15. Padam nidradaya sarve nubhuyante na chetaraha tathapyete nubhuyante yena tamko nivarayet swayam evanubhutitvat vidyate nanubhavyata nyatra jnanantara bhavat agneyo natvasattaya madhuryadisvabhavanam anyatra svagunarpinam swasmin stadarpanapeksha no nachastyanyarpakam arpakantararahityepi astyesham tatsvabhavata ma bhutathanubhavyatvam bodhatma tu nahiyate. So we're in a very beautiful portion in Panchadashi, wherein the question is, this Purva Pakshin said, okay, you said the self is beyond the 5 sheaths. And granted, it is not the Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. It's not anything that I experience, but I don't experience anything else. So maybe the self that you're talking about is non-existent. And so the Vedantin says that's not the case. Because there is an experienced entity, there must be an experiencer. So there must be somebody who is experiencing this experience, right? It would be totally weird or totally unreasonable to say there's an experience without an experiencer. So therefore, now what is the nature of that experiencer? And why is it that it doesn't need to be proved? So very beautifully in verse number 13, this is the crux, right? The crux is Swayam eva nubhutitvat, means the nature of the self is experience. The nature of the self is experience. It doesn't need to be experienced because experience is its very nature. We don't have to close our eyes or open our eyes to experience the self. We don't have to think about the self to experience the self. And even if we have a headache or, something happened to our body or our nose is blocked, we would still experience the self because it is ever experienced. So its nature is ever experienced. Swayam eva anubhutitvat vidyate. And it says na anubhavyata. We feel like we don't experience it because everything we experience in life is objectified. We make it an object and only then we experience it. It becomes an object of our senses. It becomes an object of our mind. Then only we experience it. I experience this glass only when it becomes an object to my perception and my thoughts. But Atma is not something that we make an object. It is experienced in a very different way. It is experienced as that very subject. And it says, Nyatra Jnanantara Bhavad, means there's no other knower and no other knowledge than the self. So if we were to ask, who knows the self? There's no other knower. It is self-revealing. Is there any other knowledge but the self? No, everything is the self. Everything that we know is only illumined by the self. In fact, there's a very beautiful verse in Sanskrit, and the word for I in Sanskrit is aham. Okay, the word for I in Sanskrit is aham, like aham brahmasmi. And in the Sanskrit alphabet, if you look at it, it starts with the letter a, okay, and it ends with the letter h. So it starts with a and it ends with the letter h. So the shloka or verse says that any word we utter, any letter we utter, it is in the realm of aham, I. So every time we are uttering any letter, it is pointing out to I, aham. Any word we're saying, any letter, any sentence, it is just pointing out to aham. So there's no other knowledge possible without consciousness, without the self. And therefore, because of this, it appears that the self is unknown, but it's not because it doesn't exist. It is because it cannot be objectified. That's why we feel like we don't know the self. Then an example was given about sugar. And sugar's essential nature is sweetness. And sugar lends sweetness to everything. Right? Lends sweetness to milk, lends sweetness to coffee or to tea. And when it lends sweetness to milk, right, we don't have to use milk now to lend back sweetness to sugar. Right? So sugar was put in milk. Now we don't have to say, and sugar made milk sweet. Now we don't have to go to the milk and say, now I want to make sugar sweet, or I want to prove that sugar is sweet. That doesn't make sense. Sugar's essence is sweet. You don't need to prove it. And the very fact that you became sweet, you know that sugar is sweet, right? So in the same way, the nature of the self is consciousness. And because of consciousness, the eyes can see, the ears can hear, the mind can think. And then to tell us that, okay, consciousness made all of these things conscious, now let me use these things to prove consciousness. Right? So that's an absurd thing. Let me use these things to prove consciousness, that by which we were made conscious. Doesn't make sense. So it says that you cannot use anything else to prove consciousness, because it proves everything, and it in itself is self-effulgent. It is consciousness. So there it says, don't let consciousness be objectified. In verse number 15, it says, there's ma bhut tatha anubhavyatvam. Don't need to let consciousness be objectified. Bodhatma tu nahiyate. Nothing happens to consciousness. So if somebody says, oh, I can't prove consciousness, so I don't believe in consciousness. But don't believe. Nothing happens to consciousness. I don't understand consciousness. I don't think there's really a thing called consciousness. Don't understand it. Nothing happens to consciousness. Consciousness doesn't suffer any loss because we can't prove it. It is self-proved. It doesn't need anybody to prove it. It is self-proved. Now we go on to the next verse. So what Swami Vidyāraṇya ji does is he explains this, but now he's going to give some shāstra. He's going to give some quotations from the Upanishads to tell us that everywhere, and so many Upanishads, it says that the self is self-luminous. And we know we take this Upanishads as a means of knowledge. In our tradition, means of knowledge is not just somebody's experience, but it is also the Shastra. It is also what is said in the scriptures. Because then we know it has been experienced not just by one person, but by so many illumined saints and sages. And the dharma of Shastra or scriptures is not to prove something that's not there. It's just to bring our attention to what's already there. In our rush, a mad rush of the world, we miss paying attention to things that are right in front of our eyes. And this must have happened so many times to us. When we're looking at a map and we're trying to find something and we can't find it, but that very thing is in front of our eyes, right? When we're trying to look at an app on the phone and we're trying to find out how to order something or where is that button, and we're looking everywhere, we can't find it, but it's right in front of our eyes. So the same thing, the self is actually right behind our eyes, right? And Shastra is the one that brings our attention to the self. So let us read these verses now. We're on verse number 16. Svayaṁ-jyotirbhavatyeshah Svayaṁ-jyotirbhavatyeshah Purosmadbhasate akhilat Purosmadbhasate akhilat Tameva bhantamanveti Tameva bhantamanveti Tadbhasa bhasyate jagat Tadbhasa bhasyate jagat Swayam-jyotirbhavatyeshah Purosmadbhasate akhilat Tameva bhantamanveti Tadbhasa bhasyate jagat. So this verse constitutes several Upanishad sayings. Okay, so the first one, Swayam-jyotihi bhavati eshaha, means this is self-effulgent. This is from the Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upaniṣad. Puraha asmad bhasate akhilat, which means before all of this, this was self-revealing. And this is from Nṛsiṁha-Uttara-Tāpanīya Upaniṣad. And then tameva bhantam anveti means after it shines, everything else shines. Tad bhasa bhasayate jagat. By its illumination, the whole world is illumined. So this is the second line is from Kaṭha Upanishad, Muṇḍaka Upanishad, and Śvetāśvatara Upaniṣad. They all have similar verses there. So we'll see one by one. So the first one is Bṛhadāraṇyaka. It says the self is self-revealing. What does that mean? It means that in the context of Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upaniṣad, a question is posed that in deep sleep, how are we aware? How are we aware? Because everything is shut off. The outside lights, the lamps are shut off, right? When we go to sleep, we turn off the lights and we close the blinds so we don't even see the moon or anything or the stars. And our senses are shut off. The mind is shut off. And the ego, the individuality is shut off. It also goes to sleep. And yet, in deep sleep, we are aware. We didn't die in deep sleep. We are aware. So the question posed in Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upaniṣad is, who knows the self? Who knows the self? If everything is shut down and the senses are shut down, mind is shut down, ego is shut down, and yet we are aware, who is illuminating this awareness? And the answer is the self is self-aware, it's self-revealing. It is aware. So this in this Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upanishad, it proves this point. It says there is no awareness, no other awareness happening in deep sleep, but we are there. So what is there? What is that illuminating principle? It is the self. It is the Ātman. And then the next one, by Nṛsiṁha-Tāpanīya Upaniṣad, Puraha asmat, before all this, pasate akhilat, means before this evolution of the universe, the entire universe, the self alone was shining. So before anything is known in the universe, in the entire universe, before anything is known, is felt, is touched, it is the self alone that shines forth. All of this, as it will say in the second line, everything is known only after the self shines forth. We have not known anything outside of awareness, right? We have not had any experience, any thought outside awareness. So which means before anything, awareness is that substratum. Awareness is that substratum, and with awareness, everything is revealed. Everything is revealed by the cloak of awareness. And then it says, after the self shines, then only everything is revealed. So only when the self shines through the mind, through the eyes, then I can see. Only when self shines through the mind, through the ears, then I can hear. Only when self shines through the tongue, through the mind, through the tongue, then I can taste. So without the self shining forth, nothing, no experience of the world can happen. No existence of the world can actually happen without the self shining forth. And when we talk about the self, please understand it's not the ego, it's that awareness, it's that one unbroken awareness. It is like we all think that in the night sky, the moon illumines everything. The moon illumines everything in the night sky. But without the light of the sun, the moon doesn't shine. Right? So the moon is like the mind. We think that because of the mind, we're able to see everything. We're able to hear, experience everything. But without consciousness, there's no shining of the mind. There's no awareness in the mind. So therefore, this verse is to tell us that even all of our Upanishads, many of them, they are saying the same thing. Furthermore, the next set of quotations, verse number 17. Yenedam janate sarvam, yenedam janate sarvam, tatkenanyena janatam, tatkenanyena janatam, Vidyātaram kena vidyāt, Vidyātaram kena vidyāt, Shaktam vedyetu sadhanam, Shaktam vedyetu sadhanam, Yenedam janate sarvam, Tatkenanyena janatam, Vidyātaram kena vidyāt, Shaktam vedyetu sadhanam. So this is also another quotation, right? So this is from Bṛhadāraṇyaka Upaniṣad, and it says, Yena idam janate sarvam. So that by which, Yena, that by which, idam sarvam, all of this, janate, that by which all of this is known, tat kena anyena janatam, how will something else know it? How will something else know it? Vidyātaram kena vidyāt, how will one know the knower? Shaktam vedyetu sadhanam, because all sadhanam, all instruments, they are capable, shaktam, where vedye, only in their field of knowledge. All instruments are only capable in their field of knowledge. So how can that, by which the whole universe is known, be known by anything else? By what can the knower be known? The mind, the instruments of knowledge, can know their own precepts only. So first let's think of idam sarvam. So that which knows all of this, that which knows everything that the senses can do. The senses can see, hear, smell, taste, touch. That which knows the realm of the entire senses. That which knows, when I say know here, I mean illumine. That which illumines all of the thoughts of the mind and the intellect. So that which illumines all of the thoughts, that which illumines all of the senses, that which illumines all of the entire world, that by which everything is illumined, how can anything illumine that? How can anything illumine that? Because all of these things that illumine the world, they have a limitation. The eyes have a limitation that they are only strong or shakti, they only have shakti, they only have power in the field of form and color. The ears have a limitation that they only have power in the field of hearing. The nose has a limitation that only it can smell, it can only smell. Tongue has a limitation, can only touch, taste. Tongue can only taste. Skin can only touch. So all these things, they have a limitation in their field. And we know that Ātman is not, it cannot be seen, heard. We can't hear Ātman. We can't touch Ātman or smell it or taste it. The mind also has its limitation in the realm of thought. It has its limit, that's its field. Its field is just thought. But we all know that Ātman cannot be thought of. What are you saying? But all we're talking about here is Ātman. That is true, but when we are speaking here, what we are doing is we are using words. Those words are indicating Ātman. Those words are indicating Ātman. They cannot touch Ātman. The words here are meant like a pole vault. They're meant for us to hold until a certain point, and then we leap over the words. We leap over the words. We leap over the thoughts. So even those thoughts, they cannot come to the field of Ātman. They have the mind has its own limitation. So when we talked about it last week, that Ātman is not known by inference, this we had said because all inferential cognition is based on perception. It's based on perception. Everything we see, we infer things that we've seen before. Because we've seen smoke and fire together, we infer that when there's smoke, there's fire. I have seen it together. When we compare things, when we use upamana, that, that which looks like an orange but is not an orange, you buy that. That's called a clementine. Because we've seen that before. That's why we can make the comparison. Or even the field of postulation. I see that the roads are wet. So I postulate it must have rained. It must have rained. Or I postulate somebody could have put a hose there on the road. That's why it's wet. Or, or they had some party and they just poured buckets of water on the road. That's because I've seen things, so I postulate. And even the absence, knowledge of absence, let us say today I notice somebody's absent. It's because I've seen them before, then I know that they're absent. So all these fields where we think through inference, through postulation, through comparison, we're all basing those on perception. And even when we think of Shabda pramāṇa means the Upanishads. When we think of the Upanishads, because one of the means of knowledge is Upanishads. Upanishads is a valid means of knowledge. It is using words and it is using the instruction of Guru and Shishya, the teacher and student. But even those words tell us to go beyond words. So even those words tell us to go beyond words. So even if we are using the Upanishads, we are studying about Ātman, it is telling us to go beyond words, to go beyond thought. So therefore, because all of the senses and the mind, they have limited field of what they can know and what they can perceive, they can never know Ātman. They can never know Ātman. They can know a concept, but they will not know the self. And then somebody will ask, well, how will I know Ātman? Later it will come. Later it will come. So at best, what all of these are, they're lakshanas, they're indicators. Sat is a beautiful word which says Ātman is changeless. And what we're meant to do with Sat is take away all that's not changeless. And when all of that's not changeless goes away from our mind, we are left as we are Sat. Chit, what Chit is meant to do is to negate all that is inert, all that is an object of experience. It's meant to negate all of that. And when we negate all of that, what we are left with is ourselves, which is that consciousness. Ananda is to negate all that is finite. All that is finite. Why? Because bliss can only be found in infinitude. Every time we feel limited in time and space, we are very sad. Anytime somebody else, you only have 5 minutes, you only have 2 minutes, or you only have this much time or this much space, we feel sad. We cannot take it. We need unlimited because that's our nature. So all that Ananda is to tell us that negate all that's finite, negate all that's limited. When we do that, we are left with ourselves. So even those words and thoughts, they cannot reach Ātman. They cannot know Ātman. They're only meant to take us beyond thoughts and beyond words where Ātman lies. So with this, today we will conclude. As I had mentioned, I have to perform a special prayer today. So we will take up more next week. Okay? Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Hari Om, everybody. Wish you a Shubha Deepavali. Hari Om.